All right. Good morning, everyone. Which one do you want? There are so many options.
Let's do this, come on.
Let's do these ones here. Fantastic. So I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Felix Petersen for the first session today. And we are going to talk about not just Samsung, the company, but how Samsung works with startups and how we as founders are able to do cool stuff with one of the biggest and most exciting technology companies out there. But I think I want to start with the fact that Felix actually has a really cool story. He is not a corporate guy. He's not wearing a suit, as you can see. He was a founder himself, successful founder. You sold several companies. And I think there's a...
There's a mic hot in the
Fantastic.
back.
Thank you, guys.
Don't go to the bathroom.
It's all good. Yeah, don't go to the bathroom. I agree. So not only has he founded his own companies and sold them, but he's also been an angel investor, and he understands the founder world really well. So why don't we start there with your journey into the corporate world, and then we'll get into how it really works.
Sure. So yeah, full disclosure, we're not a sponsor of this conference. So I'm not the corporate guy who sits here because they paid. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty new to this world of sort of corporate innovation. I only joined Samsung Next last year, and before that, I was building two startups in Berlin. I'm sort of old school in the way that the first company I built was in 2004. It was a location-based service called Places.com, which we then sold to Nokia, and that was sort of then the seed for Nokia Maps, which then became Here, and then Here later on was sold as to the German car manufacturers, like a consortium of BMW and Mercedes for 3 billion, I think, 2 years ago. So it was a nice story because it really helped the Berlin ecosystem to grow. And then I did another sort of very consumer-focused startup that was called Amen, index-backed. We sort of, was sort of, I'd say, opinion-sharing platform with a lot of sort of wordplay and humor involved.
Awesome.
It was a lot of fun, but at that time we kind of, me and my co-founder, we knew that if this is not a rocket ship within a year, we're not gonna make our life miserable. So we made a pact that we wanted to get to a certain amount of users, and even though it was going well, it wasn't going well enough. So we decided to sell it and to land it, and not make it a painful process. So that was sort of a medium success, I would say. And then at the same time, I was an angel investor. After I sold Places, I started very naturally work with other founders and more sort of a very tight-knit community that it was at the time in Berlin. It was really just kind of like advice and, who's a good investor, who isn't, how does the term sheet work? I mean, this was a different time. This was before you could read all this stuff and sort of ready-made manuals yet. So I ended up writing the first check to a company called SoundCloud. And
I've heard of that.
And then some other Berlin companies, some of them exited to Dropbox, like Readmill, and ended up investing in a couple of maybe 20, 25 companies, but all just stuff I understood, and it was really more of a founder network. And then I joined a small VC fund in Portugal. We did pan-European seed investing called Faber Ventures. And then last year, I sort of switched to the double dark side. You know how they always say, when you become from a founder, you become a VC, you're going to the dark side. So I went to the dark side. And joined Samsung Next because I think it's a very credible model. I mean, there's a lot of stuff around in this sort of corporate innovation realm, and Samsung Next is really the entity in Samsung that is helping Samsung to transform more into software and services, because obviously Samsung does hardware really well. So the way they do it, and believe me, I had a lot of very critical questions before I joined. The way they do it, I think, is a credible model because it includes investing, partnerships, and M&A. So if we look at a company, we can really say, okay, what's the best way to work with this startup? Is it acquiring that startup? Is it investing in that startup? Or is it, just opening doors at Samsung? And I think that makes a lot of sense because there's this criticism of corporate VCs that, why you, especially of classical financial VCs, they're basically saying, hey, why are you competing for our deals? Why don't you just buy these companies? That's your role in this whole ecosystem.
I think that's super interesting. I want to come back to the ways that you work with startups in different capacities, but I just want to make sure. It seems like we fixed the internet somehow, and that means we'll be able to take questions by Slido, slido.com, and the hashtag is TechChill18. I don't know if we'll get it up here, but slido.com, hashtag TechChill18, and if you go in there, you'll be able to post questions that'll pop up on this little device here, and hopefully we'll see if it works. If not, I'll just keep asking you questions. But let's zoom out for a moment before we get too far into how Samsung does this. When you were a founder and investor and now in corporate, the dark side as you call it, what is your advice to founders? Should they at all be working with corporates? Is it something we should all strive to do, or do you have some general thoughts on this?
Yeah, don't work with corporates.
Don't work with corporates?
No, I mean, obviously I'm joking a bit, but I mean, when we did Places, right? This was at a time when the operators were also experimenting with very similar stuff. I mean, the idea of Places was, you have a device, you can check in. It was like an early Foursquare, but before there was iPhones, so it was a bit, we did it with the software on the laptop. People just started this digital nomadism just started, so it was a software where you could tell other people where you are. There was like a little map for your blog that you could put in the sidebar, and then when you opened your laptop at a Starbucks, we would recognize the location based on the Wi-Fi network, and then you sort of check you in and show other people where you are. At that time, the operators were convinced that they're not just want to be the dumb pipe, but they were really trying to innovate around service models where they actually would build these type of services themselves. So there was some experiments around these friend finders. So, you could basically locate your friends because obviously, as we now know, the operators know exactly where you are, and they wanted to turn that into a service. But consumers were extremely wary of that because they had it wrong, They basically had the whole idea wrong that people wouldn't check in, but that they would be tracked, and people didn't want to be tracked by their friends. So it was like Zenly, but just run by your operator and without the option of you opting out. So pretty bad idea, actually. But we were approached by the operators at the time a lot, of course, work with us and we can give you distribution. And if you're a small startup, and especially at a time before App Store and before the newsfeed, distribution was a real issue. Our app, people had to install a sys file via Bluetooth on their phone, on their Symbian phone, and this was, like I said, pre-App Store. So of course, we had very intense debates in the board. Is this something we should do? Because if Deutsche Telekom or Telefonica and these guys, they come to you and say, hey, we could pre-install you on, millions and millions of devices, that's very tempting. But I think we made the right decision by turning this down for two reasons. First, because we felt that we hadn't really found product market fit ourselves. Like there was, this was still very emerging, and smartphones weren't out, GPS phones weren't out, and we felt like we even though we are on the right track, we still didn't have the formula properly, and we were very focused on iterating and on speed and on getting it right. And we had intuitively the right feeling that we weren't, that we weren't ready for it. And the other thing, of course, is they take incredible amounts of time. These corporates, they're a black box for you in most of the times. So you think you're speaking to the right person, but you might not be speaking to the right person, and you have to do a lot of the sales for the person, on the other side. He might find you, and it's very low cost for him to say like, oh, that's really interesting, I'm going to bring this to my boss. But for you, it's not low cost. So I think if you don't have product market fit yet, or if you don't have very significant traction, don't bother with it. Really don't. I mean, of course, I'm speaking for my case, consumer first type of startup. It might be entirely different if something you do is very R&D heavy, and also times have changed. But generally, I would be very, very careful.
I think that's good advice. Maybe it's not don't work with corporates, but be careful and be mindful about doing so. It reminds me of one of my own experiences, which is it took me years to learn that when you as a founder go and talk to some sort of corporate representative or executive, you think that they also care about the full 100% of the company, right? As a founder, you care about your company. It took me years to learn that it depends hugely on who you talk to. They don't actually maybe care about, let's say, Samsung as a whole. What they care about is their units and their performance targets for the year, or strategically something that needs to happen. And you as a founder need to understand that. What does this person care about? Are you even talking to the right person? To Felix's point, you can waste a lot of time if you are not talking to the right person. And it's really hard. It's really hard. So let's move in a little bit closer now to Samsung Next, because I think it's a really cool initiative. You mentioned that you are flexible with the way that you can work with startups, right? So let's say I have a cool new location-based technology that does something that you find interesting. What would you ask me? What's necessary for you to figure out how can I work with this founder?
Right. I mean, I think the golden rule is that we never want to be option limiting for a startup, right? So we'll ask you what you need, and we can support you in different ways. If you're ready to talk to certain business units at Samsung, and you feel like being in touch with mobile and trying to figure out what to do with them makes a lot of sense. But you don't need investment because you just raised your last round. Then we'll say, okay, let's get you in touch with the right people, get you in front of them. We're very careful to not make any promises that we can't keep. So we really try to keep our word. And if that means not overpromising, then we don't overpromise, because it's a large organization, and also we don't have 100%. Nobody at Samsung has 100% transparency about everything, So basically, we're trying to get you in front of the right people. We're trying to sell you to the right people. And in other cases, it might be the right choice if you're already very strategic with what you're doing, and we feel like, oh wait, this is really complementary to a product that we have. We might as well, start talking acquisition with you right away. But for example, if we invest, we never option limit you by asking for any right of first refusal. So it's very important for us that you keep your option to sell to Google, to sell to Amazon, and portfolio companies of ours have sold to Google and to Apple and to Amazon. So we usually come in not as a lead investor. We don't ask for any weird terms. So that's the first rule. First of all, not make your life harder, and secondly, try to help where we can, without giving you a guarantee that you'll be on the next S9 or something.
There's a really interesting point here, which is, when you do work with a corporate, you have to make sure that you don't lock yourself in contractually somehow to either that same company or somehow the same situation that you entered into. And I think your point about the right of first refusal essentially means that you as a company, even if you did something with Samsung, you are able to now go somewhere else afterwards and maybe do something with another company. That for a startup can be really important, because sometimes you get locked in and the corporate that you sign something with doesn't really move as fast.
Well, it could go as far as saying that if you sell your company,
you will just say no.
we have to say no before you can sell it to someone else, right? And of course, that's crazy talk. I mean, basically investing a minority investment, but getting every optionality as a corporate that you would have from an acquisition. Then I can understand the criticism of CVCs where people say, why don't you just fucking buy them?
Right.
But I think that's gotten a lot better. We just invested in a round in a Portuguese company, Unbearable, in a Series B, together with Salesforce, together with Microsoft. And maybe a couple of years ago, that would have been, pretty unlikely scenario where you have three strategics that, definitely overlap in some fields, cooperate in others, but that would have been an unlikely scenario a couple of years ago. But because they're all smart, sophisticated VCs by now, especially the bigger Silicon Valley companies like Salesforce or Intel Capital, they're doing a great job, and they understand how it works now. So it actually allows you as a startup to take on a good financial VC as a lead investor, but then bring on strategics as additional options and additional potential exit channels that you have on board without limiting you in any way. And I think maybe, I don't know, you know this better, but 5-6 years ago, especially in Europe, that probably would have been very tough. Because also,
imagine.
I mean, things like Samsung Next or Intel Capital, they're run as separate entities, right? They're either run as funds that are structured like a financial investor. And this is very important when you work with corporate VCs, understand how they work. Are they really just, especially I'm from Germany, there's a lot of family-run offices, and they have venture capital arms now, but it basically means that the boss still basically is the final approver of any investment. And there's no independent investment committee, there's no independent incentive structure. So when you work with corporates, whether it's in partnerships or venture capital, really try to understand and take the time how it's structured on the other side. What's the is this an independent investment entity with their independent investment committee? So if you need follow-up from them in the next round, are they making rational decisions, or is it basically all run by the owner of the company, and he might not come in your next round even though you're doing well? So really understand how the other side works, and to your point earlier, also understand the incentive of the person that you're talking to, right? Because big corporations, they have different, it's very unlikely that the person you're talking to on the other side speaks for the whole company. So really make sure to understand, who am I helping and what's his goal. Also with acquisitions, understand, that basically the person buying you on the other side in the corporate probably wants to strengthen his position and build up a unit, accelerate his roadmap. That's not a bad thing at all, but understand what he's trying to build, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So just to recap here, the different ways that Samsung Next can work with startups is you can invest, you can acquire, you can set up a commercial contract with the business units. Do you do anything else? Do you incubate or accelerate? Is there any other stuff besides that?
We experimented with these models, and we dropped some of them. So we had a bit of an incubation part. We had what we called an EIR program. And we continue to experiment with different models. Like, for example, in Europe, we're going to do like a grant program where we give out 50,000 euro grants. And it's not an equity investment, it's really a grant. So we can also support projects that are even less immediate obvious for Samsung, like social entrepreneurship projects, also stuff that's far out, and also very young people. Because I see a lot of, as an angel investor also, you see a lot of people with interesting ideas, but they're so early that it shouldn't be a company yet. They're still trying to figure out their idea. And a lot of times in the current structure, they are forced to turn it into a company in order to take investment. So we're experimenting this year with giving out 10 times 50,000 euro, pretty much, I'm not going to say unconditional, but without taking equity and without, you having to turn this into a company. So one potential outcome could be, hey, it was a nice idea, we toyed around with it and it didn't work, so we're going to move on to something else.
Did you all hear that? So he's giving out 10 to 50,000 euros and you don't even have to have a company. That sounds almost too good to be true.
Like I said, we're still figuring out the conditions. We're going to announce it in a couple of months, but it's not. It's going to be really for very early young people coming out of university, that kind of stuff.
I think that's super interesting. And indeed, there is a lot of change in these different ways that corporates work with startups at the moment, which I'm really, really interested in. So thank you guys for I have a bunch of Slido questions here. You can still submit more, by all means. One question that I personally really want to know the answer to is the question about how then do you find the right person inside a corporation? Or let me start this way. Are you the right person in Samsung, or is it not always you? If you're a founder, how do you find, let's say, the right person at Samsung to talk to?
Well, I think we're a very good entry point because we can help you navigate the hardest part, which is finding the right person to build a relationship with. At the end of the day, whether it's investment or whether it's a commercial partnership, you have to build a relationship. People, you can't just go anywhere and say, hey, I'm here, I have these great KPIs, please invest in me. And, even if you have these great KPIs, and even if I like you a lot, I'm not going to invest on the first meeting. So, you follow people for a while, you build a relationship, and you look a bit at their track record, right? Like, you meet them 2, 3, 4 times, And if every time you meet them, they've done what they last time said they were going to do, it builds trust. And then you are like, okay, this guy is serious. So even, also at Samsung, you have to build a relationship with the right person in the right business unit, right? So if you're an ad network for television, then you should build a relationship with the right person at the visual display business unit. Or if you're an AI company, you should probably meet the guys that do Bixby. We can help you meet these people. So yes, in that case, I'm or my colleagues are the right entry point. But then it's really up to you. We'll bring you in front of the right person. We can give you this background of what's going on there. What's their strategic initiative? Why you might fit in? What you need to say to check the right boxes for people to listen to you. But then it's really up to you and to build this relationship. And it will take time. You can't treat a commercial partnership as a panic button when you're not growing and your board's up your ass. Trying to think like, oh shit, I'm going to go to Deutsche Telekom and figure something out. That's not going to work. So usually, whether it's financing or M&A, there's this good saying in M&A: you don't sell a company, you get bought. And it's very much true for commercial relationships and for investment, for everything. You want to act out of a position of strength, and that's by doing your own thing, growing, having traction, and building these relationships. And not going to people. People smell desperation, right? So you want to go there as a position of strength with something to offer, and then build that relationship. And eventually, they will come to you and say, "Hey, let's do this." And then they're serious because they really want to get it done.
No, I think that's a great point. Do you have a few maybe keywords to share about what kinds of startups Samsung is looking for? Technologies or sectors?
Yeah, so we're pretty broad in the sense that the mission of Samsung Next is we'll look at everything that has the potential to be transformative for Samsung products in the next 2 to 5 years. And given the width of products that Samsung does, that's a lot of things. So it's easier to say what we wouldn't do. Like, I think we're not particularly looking for pure e-commerce plays, pure operational plays. We're not really looking for retail, fintech maybe. But like everything else that you would call deep tech, do you have extra questions?
I think this means something. Either Maria has a question or our 25 minutes are up.
Just really quickly. So anything, I would say AR, VR. We'll look at health, also e-health. Anything with a very strong technical component, and in the software and service space. So we're not looking at pure hardware, but it can have a hardware component.
So hopefully that was helpful to whoever here wants to talk to Samsung. Felix, thank you so much for joining me on stage for this, and thanks for coming up here. We're going to move on to the next session, which you'll hear about in just a moment. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.